Do you ever feel like you have neck pain and no matter how much you stretch it, it just doesn't get any better? Well, let's explore another area that could possibly be contributing to your neck feeling tight. This is going to be looking at the lats. So your lats are scapular depressors, and if they're overactive or kind of constantly tight or grippy, this can contribute to our shoulder blades constantly being pulled down, which can result in a collarbone that's a little bit more flat and horizontal here versus having a slight elevation to it. And this pulling down is then constantly pulling on these neck muscles. So these neck muscles feel tight because they're actually overly lengthened and pulled on, so stretching them more isn't actually going to help. On the flip side, we're not necessarily going to actively do a bunch of lifting up here in this video, but instead what we're going to explore is working on how to release those lats, facilitate some scapular upward rotation, making sure it doesn't go into elevation, to then hopefully leave you with a more free neck. So come explore with me as we check out a couple of different ways to work on. With this first exercise, we're going to use more passive positioning to help bring some length to those lats, and then use our breath to further give length to us, expanding us from the inside out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go grab onto something sturdy. You can always use a sink countertop or maybe even door handles, but ideally you want to be able to get your arms kind of overhead to really give length to those lats. So as I'm holding on here, I'm going to have feet and knees together, and I'm going to sit down and into my hips and feel my lats lengthen. So my armpits are lengthened here, and I'm again kind of holding on to something that I can trust and really help myself sink down and into it. You can play with the angle a little bit if it feels too challenging to go straight up overhead. You can shift back, and then we can come here and go a little bit more forward with our chest and see how that feels on it. But as I'm here, I'm making sure my neck is nice and relaxed, and I'm going to inhale into my armpits, into my back, even kind of gently breathing into my hips and sit bones. And then exhaling, letting everything relax and sink down into it a little bit more. Taking about 5 breaths there. Now, if you feel vulnerable sitting into that deep squat, there's any pinching or discomfort in the front of your hips, or it just feels too exposed for your pelvic floor, you can do that same position sitting onto something so you're not hanging quite so much into it. You could also hang from something here and then just have your legs positioned on a chair in front of you so you're still getting that pull down here to lengthen your lats from the bottom part as we also lengthen your lats from the top part. Because the lats not only are scapular depressors, but when they're really tight, they can also pull us into an anterior pelvic tilt. So by positioning your body into a little bit of a posterior pelvic tilt, you're getting that length from both ends. So the next, we're going to follow that up with a little bit of active work. All right, so what we're going to do here now is a little bit of a contract relax. If you find that you have a hard time getting into a full scapular depressed position when we're in the bottom, you can always start up top here and even use that other hand to kind of pull down, set that shoulder blade down and back, and make sure that chest wall is open. What we don't want is to pull down and have everything rounded forward, because that can contribute to neck tightness in a different way. But just because a muscle is tight doesn't mean it's necessarily strong. So sometimes I find that the lats can kind of live in this like in-between land where they're not really great at lengthening, but part of it's because they're not really great at actively fully shortening with it. So really making sure we get full down and back, feel this armpit pull down towards your hip without side bending, and feeling those big lat muscles kick in is going to be an important component to then the eccentric lengthening portion. All right, so like I said, we can pull down here, and then I can come down into a split squat, or if you're here, you can use that other hand to help pull you down there with it. Thinking again of that chest wall opening, that shoulder blade sliding down and back, and then thinking about my right armpit coming down towards my right hip. You can experiment with what knee feels better down versus the other with it. Then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to inhale into my chest wall, exhale, keeping my ribs back as I slowly let the band pull my arm up overhead. So as I'm doing this, I'm feeling this scapula upwardly rotate here. What I don't want is to just slingshot it up, chicken wing out, have the shoulder shrug up, because all of those are actually not effectively lengthening those lats. So really making sure I'm pulled down here, and then as I let the band slowly take my arm overhead. The tip of the scapula is sliding around and through, which is going to give us better access to our serratus and other exercises that can also help take tension off of our upper traps here. Then we can inhale into your armpit and back in this position, giving that further length, and then exhale, give a little assist again to pull all the way back down. Now we're making sure when we go to pull down that we don't shrug up and over, right? So we want to think about that scapula sliding down and back and around our rib cage as that elbow comes back and down. Again, hold here for a moment, making sure you have that really good connection, and then slowly letting it come up. If you feel your neck start to pop up, pause, give a little wiggle, and try to think about feeling this area, let go and relax. That's also why it's important to have something that has enough tension where, yes, we want to be able to get down here, but two, we want to help it or use it to help take our arm overhead. If this band doesn't have enough tension, then we're going to go overhead and we're going to end up having to actively reach with our arm versus feeling that eccentric control with the lats. So that's another reason why you might have to have a little bit of a heavier band to go up, and then why you would need to use your other hand to help pull that arm down into a position to get that good engagement to begin with. The one last thing you want to pay attention to in this exercise is what your ribs are doing. So when you're taking your arm overhead, we want to make sure that your ribs aren't flaring, but you're keeping those ribs set as that arm is going up and overhead. That's going to allow the movement to happen from the scapula instead of happening from the spine and the rib cage that can affect our neck as well. Lastly, we're going to do a little bit more of an active press overhead and tap into our serratus. Now, if we have a lot of restriction in our lats, it's going to make it hard for us to reach overhead. So that's why we're doing those other exercises first to help set this one up for success. If this ends up feeling too challenging, we can always do the similar idea, kind of pushing away against a wall. But I really like here because it's a familiar move that a lot of people have done, but maybe not with these slight tweaks to it. So first, we're going to have our hands nice and wide. I like thinking of starfish hands. Line between your first and second finger is pointed straight ahead, and we're having a good grounded connection through our entire hand. We're going to go into this with knees a little bit back. We're thinking ribs are lifted. We're going to inhale into your back. Exhale, press through those arms, lift those ribs up to lift your knees off the ground. Now you're going to press your arms overhead. So I'm thinking as if I was trying to slide my hands forward on a treadmill, but my hands aren't going to go anywhere, so that's going to send my hips back. Now, a lot of time when people go to do a downward dog, they're kind of shooting their hips up, collapsing their chest down, and here we're bringing a little bit more intention behind it and keeping these knees soft to help sit back in our hips and get more length in between our sit bones and not having the length all come from our hamstrings. We're also continuing to feel connection in our core, feel connection in our serratus to get those shoulder blades to slide around the rib cage and give our shoulders a little bit more support in that position. Without that, we might shrug up or again kind of hang on stuff and make our neck cranky. So nice big hands here. Knees are going to be back a little bit. Inhale, and you're also watching too that the elbows aren't spun out to the side, so we're kind of hugging them in towards each other. We're going to inhale, exhale, lift up, press back, keeping those hips low, visualizing those sit bones widening. I'm thinking about kind of keeping some lift in my armpit here instead of collapsing down with it. And then I'm making sure that I haven't collapsed my chest in. So I'm just in this position here. My neck is nice and relaxed. I'm going to inhale into my armpits, into my hips. Exhale. Think about hip bones, abs, and ribs wrapping around towards each other. And taking a couple breaths here. My neck should be nice and relaxed. I should be trying to keep those elbows hugged in towards each other as best I can, keeping nice and grounded through my hands instead of letting it spin out with it. You can even play a little bit with your pelvis position of trying to think like you're trying to straighten your knees, but not letting them actually straighten. And if you tend to have a back that likes to be really rounded, this can help kind of lift your tailbone and widen those sit bones to get more opening in your hips there. Hanging out there for a couple breaths as best you can. Now you can also go forwards and backwards. You can ease into that movement with doing a little bit of just a lift up. So I can be here, I can just practice lifting up and then back down. And just by making sure that when I go to press up, that I'm reaching through my armpits and elbows versus over top, that's gonna start to kick in the serratus. But again, as I'm here, I can Shift back, keeping those knees soft, thinking about sending my sit bones towards the wall. And then I can pull myself forward and then come back down and do reps like that if it feels hard to kind of hold this position for it there. But hopefully afterwards, with some of those exercises, you might feel increased movement in your shoulders. Neck feels a little less tense. Maybe collarbones are a little bit more at that angle versus flat. That being said, this is only a few things to look at. You can definitely dive into some more of our other shoulder exercises on our channel and see what other areas you might want to explore to help free up that neck and make it a little bit happier.